These are the Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne. Their mission, today and every day for over 100 years, is to care for those with incurable cancer, always the dying, mainly the poor, sometimes the lonely and forgotten. They accept no payments. They do not charge for their care. They never have, they never will. Rather, they trust that through the generosity of donors, that the Lord will provide. And ever since the order began in the early 1900s, He has.
She's easy. Waiting.
The dying men and women who reside at Rosary Hill are not referred to as patients, they are guests, and they are treated accordingly, with hospitality and joy and friendship. And the guests are most always in the company of a sister, because the sisters see themselves as the women at the foot of the cross. They stay with the guest until the end, just like the women at Calvary on that first Good Friday. These Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne carry on the love and the legacy of one sister from over a century ago who said of her mission, "We cannot cure our patients, but we can assure dignity and value of their final days. When they get so near death, they must be waited on as if we really believed what as Catholics we say very often, that they represent Christ Himself to us." She was a member of one of the most influential families in the country. She was well educated, she was well traveled, she was a writer, she was a wife, she was a mother, she was a convert. And then one day she answered a call from Christ and she chose the poor over the prestige. She gave her life to the Lord to not only take care of the poor and the dying, but also to live with them and to love them and to teach them about Him. Rose Hawthorne was born in 1851 in Lenox, Massachusetts, in what was called the Little Red House. But she was raised in Concord, Massachusetts, the site of the first ever battle of the Revolutionary War. And so unlike many of those she would later in life come to love and serve, she did not grow up poor. Rose Hawthorne lived in a beautiful home known as the Wayside. For a while, she also lived in Liverpool, England, where her father was the American consul. She was a member of a loving and prestigious family. Rose was the youngest of 3 children of parents Sophia and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Yes, that Nathaniel Hawthorne, one of America's greatest authors, the man who wrote The Scarlet Letter and The House of Seven Gables and hundreds of other novels and short stories. Nathaniel Hawthorne was Rose's father. The Hawthorne family was not Catholic. Nathaniel was buried from the First Parish Unitarian Church, but they were religious. Sophia in particular was devoted to the person of Jesus Christ. So Rose was blessed and fortunate in her childhood. She had a famous father, and she had loving parents who provided examples of compassion and love of God.
Well, I think it offered her many educational opportunities, many opportunities to meet people who had great influence even in American history and American politics, American inventions. So it offered her really a social spotlight also, and I think it gave her the courage sometimes to be able to express her opinions, to feel comfortable expressing her opinions, expressing the truth, which I think her father was very influential in her, being able to say what was real and what was important and not be afraid of that.
With Rose Hawthorne, Mother Mary Alphonsa, we're not simply talking about someone who was holy, but a holy person who was truly a human person. And her humanity undergirded this deep religiosity that she took in. So her relationship with her mother was very close, but most especially her father. Of course, there was a great affection there. She was brought up, of course, in a very strongly religious atmosphere, in which devotion to God and reading of the scriptures was part of her life.
Rose may not have been raised Catholic, but there were several Catholic influences in her formative years which had a lasting impact. For example, the family employed Irish staff at their wayside home, and Rose often saw and heard the staff in prayer.
Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is
Then
with
there
thee.
was
Blessed
this.
art thou among women,
While living in
and
Europe,
blessed
a
is
young
the fruit of thy
Rose
womb.
visited Rome. Here was her first introduction to the Catholic Church. She saw Pope Pius IX blessing the crowd from his window, and her mother then bought for her a Pius IX medallion. In fact, one legend even has it that Rose met the Pope while walking in the Vatican gardens, and the Pope blessed her and patted her on the head. Also in Rome, her parents purchased beautiful works of religious art, including Madonna and Child, and the art was proudly displayed for years in their wayside home. Later in life, Rose would say the art and the Pope Pius IX medallion were always tenderly reverenced by me. The young Rose was also greatly moved by two lesser-known works by her father. Nathaniel's book, Our Old Home, includes the story of a child in a workshop. The author, with great love and admiration, describes a man who befriends a wretched, pale, half-torpid child with scurvy, and the author concludes, "The man did an heroic act and effected more than he dreamed of towards his final salvation when he took up the loathsome child and caressed it as tenderly as if he had been its father." No doubt the child's mission in reference to our friend was to remind him that he was responsible in his degree for all the sufferings and misdemeanors of the world in which he lived, and was not entitled to look upon a particle of its dark calamity as if it were none of his concern. Rose later learned that the man in the story was her father, written in third person. She not only read and remembered that story, she would one day live the story's message. Finally, from Nathaniel's book, The Marble Fawn, which includes a story of a young girl, non-Catholic, who out of desperation confesses to a priest the heavy burden of a particular sin. And after confession, the girl tells the priest that the hideous secret will burden my poor heart no more. And in response, the elderly priest invites the girl to become a Catholic.
Will you not allow me to bring you as a stray lamb into the true fold? Come home, dear child, poor wanderer, who hast caught a glimpse of the heavenly light. Come home and be at rest.
Words written to a fictional character, to be sure, but also a very real invitation to a young Rose Hawthorne, an invitation she would never forget, and one which years later she would enthusiastically embrace. Rose lost her beloved father Nathaniel one day before her 13th birthday. She lost her mother Sophia when she was 19. And just a few months later, she married George Lathrop, a man she met while living in Europe. They had a child, Frances. They soon returned to Concord to live in her childhood home, the Wayside. So at this time, this was a loving and happy family, Frances, George, and Rose Hawthorne Lathrop. Until 1881, when Frances died. He was 4 years old. And many who knew Rose believe this was when she first asked herself, what does God want?
I would imagine so, because she was committed to marriage and then to raising a son. Sometimes little seeds start. But I think after all of that happened with her sons dying, that she began to think about this and thinking, you know, I'm not doing enough in this world for God.
Rose's fear and frustration of not doing enough for God would soon be no more, for she would hear God calling her to come home, dear child. She would hear God calling Rose to come home and be at rest. For at the Church of St. Paul the Apostle, located near Columbus Circle in Midtown Manhattan, on the feast day of St. Joseph in 1891, at the age of 40, Rose Hawthorne Lathrop and her husband George were received into the Catholic faith.
I think what she saw in the faith was a fulfillment of what her parents imbued in her. They taught her to look for what was true, what was good, what was beautiful, and she saw the fulfillment of that in the Catholic Church. She had that foundation from her parents, but it wasn't completed until she found the church. She also described herself as having her roots in the air, like a tree that had its roots in the air, and that it wasn't until she converted to Catholicism that she felt like she had found a place for those roots to be. And she found a firm foundation and a place for those roots to grow, and she did grow in the Catholic Church.
Well, I think she was very committed to truth. You even see that in her writings later on, that she wasn't afraid to say what was true, even if it wasn't something that the public wanted to hear. I also think that there was an element in American Protestantism at the time that distanced Christ's humanity from their spirituality. And there was also a toying with that maybe Christ wasn't divine. So I think that the element of the humanity of Christ, despite that he was a divine person, and being able to relate to our Lord as a real person was very appealing to her.
I was the chaplain at St. Jude's Cancer Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. All throughout I was looking for saints to pray, to intercede for them. So there's St. Peregrine, of course, and St. Paul the Apostle, our patron. And I just a chance encounter with an older Paulist who I met said, well, you know, one of the great patrons is Rose Hawthorne. Her ministry was with cancer patients and for the poor, especially people who were poor and were suffering from cancers. So I started using her for intercession for many patients, and I would say miracles, because I think that so many amazing things happened through prayer, and especially with Rose Hawthorne. But to this day, I mean, in my ministry I do meet people, parishioners who suffer from cancer, and I always invoke her, Rose Hawthorne, for them.
Rose did nothing halfway. Once she was a Catholic, she became an active and devout Catholic. She attended daily Mass. She constantly read books about the faith. She lectured and wrote articles about being a Catholic. She volunteered at a Catholic summer school and for various Catholic charities. She once confided to a friend that she felt at home. "I feel I was born to be a Catholic," she said. So Rose had a strong faith, but she no longer had a strong marriage. Her husband, George, had become an alcoholic. Also, he may have been abusive to Rose. She insinuates as much in a letter to a friend when she writes these haunting words: "Are not we more afraid of our husbands than anything?" Rose, now the devout Catholic, would never consider divorce. She prayed for strength and courage. She sought guidance from a local bishop, and she came to the difficult conclusion that she must separate from her husband of 24 years. In her words in a letter to a cousin, "I am, alas, separated from my husband, and that it has been sanctioned by my church." Once again, Rose opened wide her heart and asked, "What does God want?" And once again, he answered.
After her separation with George, she did look to see what was it that God was asking of her for her in her life. She wanted to do a work of charity for the most destitute. That's the word she used. And I think in her time, cancer, really, the people stricken with cancer, especially the poor stricken with cancer, were the most destitute, the most neglected.
Rose had a good friend named Emma Lazarus, who, like Rose, was a writer. Emma's most famous work is still read every day by thousands. She wrote the poem "The New Colossus" at the Statue of Liberty. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses" are Emma's words. Emma was diagnosed with cancer. Because she was wealthy, she received the best available care. At the same time, Rose knew of a seamstress. She too had cancer, but because she was poor, she was sent away to Blackwell Island, literally to die. At that time, cancer was thought to be contagious, so many who could not afford treatment were taken out of their homes and shipped off to Blackwell Island, where they would stay until the end.
Rose was horrified by that, and she was really struck by the dichotomy of the treatment these two women received, one because she was a wealthy person and the other because she didn't have any money. And she said then a fire was lighted in her heart, and she felt that those were the poorest of the poor and that they needed her. She always needed, she had a great need to be needed.
Rose Hawthorne now recognized her life's mission. She attends nursing school at the New York Cancer Hospital. She moves out of her comfortable residence, a lifestyle she has always known. She rents a flat in the poorest part of town, and she begins to not only treat the cancerous poor, but she lives with them, and she loves them. And when she looks at them, she says she sees the face of the suffering Christ.
But I believe that the Lord had use of all the suffering in her life. The suffering begins to strip things away within you, and you become more and more dependent upon God, and you're more and more in cooperation with grace, so that the life of God then begins to work more deeply within you. She had this need to be useful. I think she'd had enough of living in more or less, not necessarily an aristocratic family, but a family that knew really no great wants. And so putting all of that together, allowing the life of Christ to work within her, I think it just began to meld. What would pull her in that direction, that she would make herself very useful.
She always did everything full. I mean, nothing was ever half. I almost kind of imagine this encounter with Christ where Christ says to her, you know, give me everything, and then you'll watch what I will do. And I think she was waiting for that moment of what he was going to show her, what she was supposed to do. And then when she knew that, she went complete in that. I'm going to live amongst the poor. I'm going to care for them myself. I'm not going to just start a charity where people donate money and I run the charity. It's no, I'm going to be the nurse giving care to the poor.
It just amazed me that she went through so many things, and that she even founded our order when she was not even a Catholic at first. I mean, and how she was a wife and a mother, and how she lost her child, and she suffered so much, and all the struggles, and being a woman of society. I mean, she had a name from the Hawthornes, and how she just gave up everything to follow Christ, where she just found him, the one that loved her so much, and that she needed to return that love somehow, and that just took over her life. Had that desire to love him, and that's how she loved him, in the poor and the sick and the dying. There was one expression of Mother Alphonsa that always, I think that's the one that's closest to my heart. If Christ was to knock on our door, we would not be ashamed to show him what we have done.
This was New York City turn of the century when Rose began living with and caring for the cancerous poor. And the Lord wasn't finished with Rose just quite yet. She was joined in her mission by Alice Huber, who would soon become Rose's most trusted companion in her work. And at the urging of another friend who was witnessing their work, a Dominican priest, Rose and Alice professed their vows and formed a religious community, the Dominican Sisters Congregation of St. Rose of Lima. Alice became Sister Rose, and Rose Hawthorne became Sister Mary Alphonsa.
At the core of a human person is a certain amount of restlessness. Now with the saints, they would have such this itching restlessness. They would have such a profound thirst. They would be on such a journey that they would make that next leap. Rose could. And most saints do. They come to a time in their life where that thirst, that restlessness is so profound that they have to say, I have to take the leap that most other people can't. Now that might mean giving up riches. That might mean giving up prominence. That might mean giving up marriage. That might mean giving up home and going somewhere else. Most of the time, there's leaving behind something to embrace more enthusiastically someone else, namely Jesus and his church. And that, of course, is what Rose did. And the saints would all have it. They'd be the first one to say, Rose would say to you that, well, I may have turned away from wealth, prestige, prominence, comfort, but, and I'm glad I did, but then he wasn't done with me.
The Lord wasn't done. Sister Mary Alphonsa sure wasn't done either. The first St. Rose's free home for incurable cancer was the small apartment inside the tenement building where Rose lived. It would soon prove to be far too small to meet demand, so others, larger, would follow. And in 1901, the mission expanded to Hawthorne, the current site north of New York, where every day for the final 25 years of her life, Sister Mary Alphonsa, later Mother Mary Alphonsa, welcomed and comforted the poor and dying and provided for them a death with dignity. And where today her mission is as vibrant as ever, the love is as real as ever, and the Lord is as present as ever. Soon after establishing Rosary Hill, Sister Mary Alphonsa wrote, "Let the poor, the patient, the destitute and hopeless receive from our compassion what we would give to our own families if we were really generous to them. Let the woman who begs for care have comfort and bestow upon this representative of Christ a little gentle attention till she dies. This is all. Yet it requires the sacrifice of your life. But that is why Christ asked it, and blesses with an unending reward the simple choice."
I think Rose Hawthorne is a distinctively American and Catholic story. She's the daughter of the last literary flowering of Puritan New England, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Yet she becomes a Catholic. She finds the fulfillment of that part of the American experience in Catholicism. Then, after marrying and becoming a parent, the marriage becomes troubled, the son dies, and she starts a religious community. To do what? To do something very peculiarly American, voluntarily care for the sick. So there is something deeply rooted in the American story and the religious history of the United States, the cultural history of the United States, in the life of this quite remarkable woman who many believe will become recognized as a saint someday.
Well, once she became a Catholic, I think her relationship with Jesus Christ blossomed very quickly and very profoundly. The remarkable energy that she evidenced, especially in the early days, when she would be caring for the one or two patients that she had in the apartment, and then would go out to visit other people in their homes who were sick, and then went off to church. I mean, the amount of physical energy that she had to produce and exhibit was, to me, very remarkable. St. Catherine of Siena is another example, a similar person. Some people are lovers by temperament, and I think that was true of Rose, that she was a lover, and she searched for the fulfillment of that love all of her life and only found it when she became a Roman Catholic and then became a religious, and I don't think she could help herself. She needed to love others.
And actually, once she was a religious, Rose realized that what she felt God wanted her to achieve, because this was always about what God wanted with Mother, it was more than bathing them and feeding them and giving them a safe, warm place to be. It was really that we were to love them and to treat them as our family, but to see Christ in their suffering, because that's what makes it possible, day in and day out. And to bring Christ to them, to be the instrument that shows them that God loves them.
What is the life of heroic virtue? It is about the stuff of life and living it with a high degree of fidelity to one's state in life. Rose Hawthorne was married, and she was at various times challenged by that relationship, and she stayed faithful to it. She suffered the loss of a child. Through all of that, she deepened her life in God. And to be able to put all of that within the context of a very deep life of faith and trust in God and also love for the other. That's heroic virtue, lived in ordinary circumstance. She was moved to see within each of those people Christ as the guest. I often say, and I have great love for Mother Teresa and her sisters, but the foundress was Mother Teresa before there was a Mother Teresa.